Ten today on a Thursday. It is truly great to have you with us, Dave Revson, Howard Griffith, and Jake Butt. We have a full house today because we have a loaded show. This is going to be tremendous. It's coming up at the bottom of the hour. We are going to reveal not the dates of the games. Okay. That is coming soon. But we are going to reveal over the next 5 years who everyone in the Big Ten goes head-to-head against in conference play. And, man, I can just say, having looked through it, as I know you guys have, there are some amazing matchups coming our way.
It really is. And you think about some of the historic programs that are going to see some Oregons come to town, Washington, SC, UCLA coming to the Midwest, going out east. It's really an exciting time for the Big Ten Conference.
Yeah, I mean, look, I like games with implications. I like big brand on big brand, and I'm looking at this schedule right here. We got some good stuff coming throughout this show and through the next 5 years.
It's going to be really good. Again, we're revealing this in conjunction with the conference. It's coming up at the bottom of the hour. It will be on big10.org as well, but we're going to go in depth. We're going to talk about the implications. We're going to explain to you how this schedule came to be. So lots of good information that you can only get here. But again, bottom of the hour, that will come out. So we've got the somewhat distant future. How about the immediate future? Biggest game this weekend is in Columbus. Ohio State and Maryland, both unbeaten coming in. First time the Terps have started 5-0 in more than 2 decades. Maryland leads the Big Ten in total defense. Ohio State is 6th in the nation in total D. The Terps have never beaten the Buckeyes. They've never beaten a ranked Big Ten team as a conference member. Can they end those nevers on Saturday? We will find out. Let's dive into this. I want to start with what you're watching when the Buckeyes have the ball.
You know, I think one of the important parts of this game is what's going to happen in third down situations with the Buckeyes. So it's surrounding the quarterback, has to be able to make plays, has to be able to make good decisions. I think running the football early will be important to take the pressure off.
Yeah, off of that, the pressure, in a sense, is on McCord because, listen, you're coming off a bye week, which it's a mental reset. You can breathe. For him, there's been times of great success. That last final drive versus Notre Dame, he can look in that huddle and know those guys trust him because he led his team down the field. But by that exact measure, he almost threw a pick to seal the game.
Right.
So it's been some good, some bad. One thing Maryland's defense does about as good as anyone, if you put the ball in their defensive secondary's hands, they're going to intercept the football. So for McCord, that's something, as much as you want to be aggressive, you got to avoid the turnovers.
Yeah, I think what's fascinating is we talked about this quarterback position and McCord in particular being the leader, being the starting quarterback. He's now going through the process of really understanding, I think, because it's the outside forces that are also important, that are also on him about being the starting quarterback at Ohio State. The team believes in him. The coaches obviously believe in him. Now it's time to continue that and really come up with big plays when he needs to, but he can't force the football. As you just mentioned, this is a really good Maryland team, and I know some people will talk about who they've played up to this point, but I don't think this is a team you want to be in a shootout with because this is a talented Maryland football team.
When you talk about who you play, too, because some people can say, well, the teams just gave them the football. Often teams give away the football all the time, but not everyone takes it. They take it when the ball comes their way.
Their secondary is really good. Yeah. +9 turnover margin. You think about that, that is 2nd in the nation. I mean, that is really good. We have for years talked with Mike Loxley, right, about this notion. I love it, where he says Terps against Terps, that they commit they self-inflicted wounds. They bring it upon themselves. It's really the opposite this year. They're taking it to teams. So what about the flip side here? I mean, one of the ways they're taking it to teams is, I mentioned they have the best total offense in the Big Ten. They're number 1 in yards per game. We believe that Ohio State's defense is better than a year ago, but this is a different, more explosive offense. I mean, again, Notre Dame is really good, but this is a different challenge that Maryland poses than what the Irish pose, and it plays at the areas where Ohio State has struggled defensively in recent years, and that's the big plays.
The big plays have been there, but give Ohio State some credit. Against Notre Dame, they weren't giving up those big plays. They were challenged, contested balls down the field. So they made some plays there, but that was from a quarterback where you knew where he was going to be in the pocket, right? You knew exactly where he would be. Talia can break the contain. He can get outside, and one of the things that Ohio State has struggled with is getting pressure on the quarterback. So if he can extend those plays, that all of a sudden really allows them to come up with some big plays, possibly.
Big plays has been a storyline for Ohio State's defense going back to last year. Maryland in that game, when they faced each other, they had 8 explosives in one game. Mm-hmm. This year, Ohio State's defense has only given up 9 on the season, so there has been improvement. But this, for every reason you just mentioned, Howard, this is a big test for the Buckeye defense. On the flip side, I think this is a career-defining opportunity for Taulia. I mean, the Big Ten record books, he's towards the top of a number of categories. The one thing he's missing is that huge win as an underdog versus an Ohio State, a Michigan, a Penn State. They have the talent offensively to put up some points. The challenge is, can you do it against a Buckeye defense that's the best defense they've seen all year?
It is the story of Maryland when you think about it. This is the year we all believe that they have a chance and they're talented enough to knock off one of the big 3 in Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State. Who would it be? Who knows? But this is how they have that defining moment. And this is a big opportunity, not only for Taulia, but the program in general to continue to say we're going in the right direction.
And again, they have gotten to the point now where they beat the teams they are supposed to beat. But it is staggering to think of how long it has been since they have beaten a ranked conference opponent. It far predates their time in the Big Ten. Can they seize that moment? We looked at the schedule. We said, hey, if everything goes their way, they could be 5-0 going into that Ohio State game. Here they are, comfortably 5-0. Can they get to 6-0? That is a huge hurdle. Again, Joel Klatt going to join us, talk about this game. He'll be calling it. He'll be on the show in. Our big stat is brought to you by Walgreens. There is no team in the nation that has won more volleyball national championships than Penn State, 7 all-time, 2 ahead of conference rival Nebraska. Nittany Lions' last national championship came in 2014, and they won one in 1999. And our big interview was a key member of that team, and great to have her with us as we are joined by the head coach of the Nittany Lions, Katie Schumachr-Cawley. Coach, great to have you. When you think about those national championships, what pops into your mind?
I mean, just how fortunate I am to be a part of this program. And, you know, I always think of the great times we had with my teammates. And, you know, when we won, it was in Hawaii. And I don't think you could have asked for a better trip. So, no, I'm just really special friendships and time of my life.
Yeah, you're floating around and you're in paradise. So that's a pretty good combination. Let's talk about this year's team. You guys are 4-0 in the Big Ten. What have you been most pleased with in terms of this conference start?
You know, I think just that the fact that we're getting better and better every week, that's been our goal, and we're working really hard. And, you know, it's hard to win in this conference. It's hard to win, period. And I'm happy for the team and for their growth so far, and that we're going to continue to do everything we can to prepare this group.
Well, you talk about preparing this group, and it was interesting to look through your non-conference schedule. And I know you're not alone in this. A lot of Big Ten teams schedule really tough non-conference opponents as well. And I guess I'm just always interested in the balancing act, because here you are in this conference, which is far and away the best volleyball conference in the country. You know you're going to get matches that will really challenge you. Frankly, you know you're going to lose some matches along the way, because that's just how good this league is. So how do you decide, like, how many challenging non-conference matchups to have versus how many you need just to build some confidence to get some W's?
Right. Well, we knew we were going to have a new group in, and, you know, I think it was important for us to challenge them early so that we were prepared for conference. So, yes, it was a humbling experience to lose some matches in preseason, and, you know, I'm proud of the way that we bounced back. And, yeah, this conference is relentless, and we have to be ready to go and focused every night. And, you know, we want to be the most prepared team.
Well, the teams you have to be prepared for this weekend include Ohio State, and that's going to be a really interesting situation for Mac Pedraza. She was, of course, a really great player for 4 years at Ohio State. Now she goes against her former team. It is unusual, but it is not unique. I mean, there is some of this now in this day and age of college athletics. What are you going to say to her in advance of that about facing some of her former teammates?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have to say a whole lot to Mac. I think she will be prepared, and she's excited. She gets excited for every match, and she prepares herself really well. I'm proud of what she's done here, and I'm proud of what she did before she came to Penn State. And not only as a player, but she graduated from there. She got a master's degree from there, and here she is getting a certificate at Penn State and just having a different experience. So I'm looking forward to both matches this weekend, and I know Mac will be ready.
Yeah, you do have some good ones coming up this weekend. It's also Alumni Weekend, which to me has got to be really interesting for you. I mean, you are someone who's so deeply connected to this program. We talked about the 1999 National Championship. You've been an assistant coach there for quite a while before leaving and becoming a head coach elsewhere, and then coming back and serving as an assistant. So kind of take me through what it's like for you as an alum, as someone who loves Penn State and who played there and is so connected to those players, but also now as the ambassador of the program, as the head coach and the person who is welcoming some of your former teammates back to the fold.
Yeah, I mean, it's still surreal for me every day, being at Rec Hall and having a bunch of my teammates back, players that came before me and after me. It's a really special place, and I'm so excited to see some of my teammates and some of the younger ones that obviously set some big records here. And, to have Megan back on staff has been amazing. And, I think she'll be just as excited in welcoming back some of her teammates. But, I'm happy. I'm excited. It'll be a great weekend, and we need to play some good volleyball.
We talked about this right when you took over, but kind of in the same vein. Succeeding Russ Rose. I mean, here is someone who was your coach, who was your mentor, who obviously casts an enormous shadow. Those are huge shoes to fill because of how great Penn State was under his tutelage. What has that been like for you now that you're a couple of years into this, into being the head coach at Penn State?
Well, I mean, there's no one like him, and I'm never going to replace what he did. My goal is to continue his legacy and to, honor him and my teammates and everyone that came through the doors at Penn State. So I'm lucky he's still around and gives me input all the time, and he always has great advice for me.
The standard is so high at this program, and obviously a huge part of the reason why is Russ Rose, but it's the only program ever to make every single NCAA tournament, which to me just boggles the mind. We mentioned it has been a while since Penn State has won a national championship, haven't been to a Final Four since 2017. You're certainly knocking on the door. What's the missing piece, do you think, to get back to that level?
Well, I'm just glad I didn't screw it up last year getting into the tournament. That's the first thing. I think it's just to continue to recruit how we can and to get the players that are here better and better every day. And, this team wants to win. They're competitive, and they know that it's a daily task, and it's not just Friday, Saturday. It's what they're doing every day throughout the week. And, in practice, our second side is at times just as good, if not better, than the first side, and that's what you want to see in practice. So I'm proud of all of them and for what they've been doing, and we still got a lot of season ahead of us.
I always like to get into the background of the coaches and the players that we talk to, and yours is really interesting. You are a Chicagoan. You have really deep Big Ten ties in your family. Your dad played football at Michigan. Your brother was a really good player at the University of Illinois. I know your dad has passed away, but what were the Big Ten rivalry discussions like in your household between the Illini and the Wolverines and the Nittany Lions?
Oh, friendly wagers all the time. But no, it was, growing up in Chicago, it's Big Ten or nothing.
Yep.
And I was just really fortunate to be exposed to different schools. And, between my dad and my brother, everyone, had a great career and really loved where they went to school. And I know that they're always cheering for me now. So that's all that matters.
Now, you have something to explain here because you are a South Sider, but you are a Cubs fan. How did that happen?
Yes, I know. Yeah. I know. Well, all right. I had an uncle, Frank Maloney, who used to work for the Cubs. He was the ticket manager for about 30 years there.
All right.
So as a kid growing up, we were always going up to Cubs games and hanging out. And, it was a real special time in my life and, with my cousins and my brothers and sisters. So, we were real lucky.
All right, that's fair enough. I will give you a pass on that. I'm a Northside White Sox fan, and it's connected to my family as well. But I always expect.
I still like the Sox. I still like them. I'm a Chicago fan now.
You can't like both of them. You can't like both of them.
Come on.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't like the Cubs. I'm just going to come right out and say it. So I appreciate your willingness to straddle both sides of that fence. You were a fabulous high school athlete. I mean, not just a great volleyball player, but also an incredible basketball player. You were inducted a number of years ago into the Chicagoland Sports Hall of Fame. And I was looking at the induction list when you were put in that Hall of Fame. Gale Sayers, Dick Butkus, Andre Dawson. What was that like to be around all of those Chicago legends?
Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking. I grew up in a great neighborhood, and I grew up with a ton of great athletes. And, you know, from grade school to high school, I played with some of the best athletes around, and I was really fortunate to be on some really successful teams. So, I mean, without that and going to Mother McCauley, I don't know if, I would have been noticed. But, I'm lucky and not real sure if I belong on that list, but I'll take it. It was a real special night for myself and my family.
You have 3 daughters. How aware are they of what a great athlete you were?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think they're more, let's say, obsessed with the Penn State girls and want to know everything about them and what they're doing. So, I think they know we had a good high school team, and, that's really about it. I think they're all Penn State, and they're really into it. They come to all the matches, and they know who's who on the other team. So
right.
I'm lucky. I'm lucky they love it, and I'm lucky that I have a great husband that takes care of them.
Yeah, what's the balancing act there of motherhood and coaching?
Yeah, it's tough, but, I have really great people around me that support me in this career. And, from the time that we lived in Chicago with my family being there to coming back to Penn State, it's a special place, and a lot of people want to help, and I'm real lucky.
All right, Katie, I want to leave you with just a quick look ahead to the weekend. You've got Indiana, which is really improving. You've got Ohio State, which is nationally ranked. Give us a quick thumbnail on each of those teams and what you're going to need to do to stay unbeaten in conference play.
Yeah, I think both teams are playing well. I went to college with Steve Aird, the head coach at IU, and I think he's done an exceptional job there, and they compete hard. So, like I said, every match for us is going to be tough, and we have to be prepared. And, IU and Ohio State, whatever their records are, it doesn't matter. And for us, we have to play well at home, and you got to win at home. So that's our goal.
Katie Schumachr-Cawley, always fun to visit with you. Thanks so much for taking the time. Best of luck this weekend, and again, really a pleasure as always.
Thanks. Great to see you.
The weekend lineup of games in the Big Ten shaping up like this. Nebraska and Illinois. That is tomorrow in Champaign. Saturday, we've already discussed Maryland, Ohio State. We have Northwestern and Howard. Other conference clashes, Rutgers, Wisconsin, Purdue, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota. Let's dive into Purdue, Iowa here briefly. Both coming off wins, but obviously for Iowa, they lost their quarterback, Cade McNamara. What are you watching in this one?
Well, you want to see if they can establish the run, but I don't think anything's really going to change from this offense from what we've already seen. They can be more efficient. That'll be a big part of it, and they'll need to be more efficient going against this defense. They're going to have to be able to protect their quarterback.
On the flip side of this, I think about Purdue, and the question that gets answered this weekend was last week a turning point in their season. A couple changes. Ryan Walters calling plays on defense. We saw how that affected them. Health is a big point. Gus Hartwig is healthy. Garrett Miller, the tight end, is healthy. So the opportunity is, this is a toss-up. These are two teams, that could use a win. Good chance for Purdue to say, hey, last week, continue the success that you found.
How about the success in running the ball? Are you guys surprised how well they've run it here these last couple of weeks?
Well, I think one of the things that's where they needed to get to try to create some of that balance and take some pressure off the pass game. To me, you have to be able to run it, something that in previous years, it really wasn't that important. They wanted to throw it around, but I think that nice balance helps them.
It goes hand in hand with the healthy center, veteran, and getting your tight end position healthy. So I think those play off each other.
It always goes back to the tight end.
Of course.
If you worked him in earlier, no one responded, so you worked him in.
You're on train now. You guys are on the board. Let's go.
It's a tight end show. It's like you with the fullback.
There you go.
It's kind of the same thing. The time is here. We're diving into our big story. It is the announcement of the conference opponents for each school over the next 5 years. The model is called the Flex Protect 18. It builds on the principles of the schedule that was released in June before the two latest editions. That model protected historic rivalries, emphasized playing all of the other conference opponents as frequently as possible. The number 18, obviously a nod to the 18 schools with the additions of Washington and Oregon, as well as USC and UCLA. It's Big Ten today. Dave Revson, Howard Griffith, Jake Butt. We're going to be with you for the next hour, so we've expanded the show by a half hour today. We're going to dive into these matchups. But first, before we get into the matchups, we want to explain to you how this came about. There was a ton of thought that went into it, that went into this model. Want to explain to you what the backstory is and what the priorities were and how well they were achieved. It will boggle your mind a little bit. It is really impressive. There are 12 protected games. We'll get to those in a moment. Outside of the protected rivals, each team is going to play the other teams in the conference at least twice, once home and once away, in a 5-year span. No team will play any other team more than 3 times every 5 years. So you play your rivals every year. You play everyone else either 2 or 3 times in 5 years. The conference never wavered from the 9-conference game format. Again, the goal has always been to play one another frequently. Competitive balance was a goal. The idea is for the schedules to be as equitable as possible based on historic trends, also to position the conference well for maximizing entry into the expanded CFP as it evolves. And then there's travel. That is a major focus. A lot of time was spent on that. No team will head west more than once in a season. As far as the West Coast teams, the years that they have 5 road games, one of those road games will be their rivalry game. So in other words, in years UCLA has 5 conference road games, one of those games will be USC, and then vice versa, obviously, in the other years. Same for Oregon and Washington. So it minimizes travels for those schools. So that was the list of priorities. We'll dive a little bit more into the details, and obviously we're going to get into the schedules here in a bit. But I do think it's important to talk about the overarching philosophy. What stands out there?
Yeah, to me, the ability to travel, or you don't have to travel as much, in the fact that the student athlete gets to play in all of these venues. I think that's a big part of what they wanted to achieve. Travel restrictions or limiting some of the travel to the West Coast was a big part of it as well.
That's one of the best parts about being a student athlete is the experience, and to get to go play in some historic stadiums and some big matchups. The one thing that stood out to me was a few key words here: maintain control and flexibility as postseason evolves. Yes. Because the one thing we've learned here is that the one constant is change. Who knows what tomorrow brings? Further change could come. So when you build in the option to stay fluid and stay flexible, that's just smart forward thinking for the conference as a whole.
Again, there was so much time that went into this. I spent some time on the phone yesterday with Kevin Pauga, who I think people probably know by now, but he is a scheduling guru. Originally was working with Michigan State basketball, has expanded to include conferences and teams all over the country. He was telling me there's so many permutations and combinations that he would input data into his computer, go to sleep, send it up to the cloud, and then when he woke up, he'd have dozens of schedules to sift through based on all of the priorities that they had put together. So incredible amount of time. There's amazing detail. We talk about the travel. He was telling me they went so far as to think about travel time to and from airports. So in other words, the flight might be longer, but the travel to the airport is shorter. Purdue, the airport's right on campus. So how does that change the factors there in terms of the travel? He also emphasized, and we're not going to show you all 5 years of the schedules. We're going to show you the first 3 years because everyone's going to play one another in those first 3 years. But if you look at it over 5 years, there will never be a 3-year gap between schools playing one another. So if you play in year 1, you will play again before year 5, right? You're not going to play in year 1 and then not play years 2, 3, and 4. So the level of detail is amazing. The protected rivalries were so important to everyone in the league. And so let's look at those. There are 12 of them. There were 11 in the spring. The only difference is Oregon and Washington was added. Other than that, these are the same protected games. The conference worked with the athletic directors to understand which games were most important to their fan base. Iowa has 3 protected rivals. Penn State has none. Everyone else has 1 or 2. Again, these games are going to be played every year. It's important to note that next year, the location of these games will be the opposite of this year. So you won't have anyone on the road for their rivalry game in consecutive years, even though we are moving to a new format. In fact, no team will play a road game against the same opponent this year and next year. So amazing level of detail here, and you guys both played in huge rivalry games. I think they were always going to protect these games. I don't think you were ever going to go from a format where you announced in the spring that these games are important and suddenly they're not. But these games are so big to the players and to the fan bases.
First off, I'm just glad someone much smarter than me is figuring out all this stuff of
Kevin's
home
right.
and away and travel. Yeah, and we just get to sit back and watch some good football get played. And for the rivalries, that's what makes college football. That's what's so special about it, right? Like you're almost born into these rivalries. And to protect that and emphasize, that's a smart thing to do, and they did a good job.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You talk about protecting those. But how about some of the new rivalries that'll come up? That's what's really so exciting to me about this. And let's take the players out and just to think about the fan bases, right? Big Ten fans want to travel to some of these historic venues. So the opportunities to go back and forth is going to be a lot of fun.
It is going to be amazing. And when you start getting into some of these games, you kind of start salivating thinking about them. It's already an amazing league. And then you add in these 4 schools that are really rocking and rolling right now, that are playing very good football. And I love that they protected the rivalries that matter. They didn't force rivalries. They didn't say, well, everyone's got to have 1 or everyone's got to have 2. The rivalries that matter have been clearly articulated. Those are preserved. And then, as you say, Howard, so many new opportunities to create them. Again, let's get now from the abstract to the concrete. What does this actually mean? Let's dive into some of these schedules. We are going to show you 3 years at a time. But again, the conference releasing 5 years on Big10.org. Let's start with Oregon. The Ducks are going to face Washington every year. It'll be at home next season, one of 5 games at Autzen. That will include a visit from Ohio State, the first time the Buckeyes will come to town since 1967. They did play in Columbus a couple of years ago. Road games for Oregon next year include a visit to Michigan, a trip to Wisconsin. In 2025, the Ducks will play 4 at home. That includes USC as well as a return trip from the Badgers. They will have 5 road games that year. That will include a trip to Washington. And again, that will be the case every year the Ducks play 5 conference games on the road. 1 will be in Seattle. Other road trips include their first visit to Penn State since 1964. 2026 will include their first conference matchup with Nebraska. Washington gets 4 home games next year. UCLA and USC, no strangers to Seattle. Michigan visiting for the first time since 2002. Northwestern for the first time since 1984. Washington has 5 road games, so you know they are at Oregon for 1 of them. They'll also visit Penn State and Iowa. It'll be their first ever trip to Beaver Stadium and their first to Iowa City in 60 years. The 2025 Huskies on the road for 4 games, including the lengthy trip to Maryland. First time those schools will have ever met in the regular season. They did play in the Aloha Bowl in the 1980s. They'll also play at Michigan and Wisconsin. And then 2026 features their first conference games against Minnesota, Michigan State, and Nebraska. So you get a little bit of a sense for it there. What stands out?
I think immediately I think about Oregon, going to the big house and playing. And that's going to be exciting because you're going to have those fans travel from Oregon. But to see, which we know will be a dynamic color scheme that they'll bring to the big house, is going to be fun. And this is a team that's really got things rolling.
What stands out to me is think about how we talk about scheduling this point. Like, hey, this team has an easy schedule. This team has a tough. Where's the easy schedule there? I mean, seriously, my heart starts racing a little bit as a football fan. Like, that is good on good. You're not going to look at that schedule and say, man, we got a break this year. You're going to have to be ready to play every single year.
And again, think about it. We're talking about an expanded college football playoff now. And so I think it's going to be okay, certainly, to lose a couple of games along the way. If you lose them against real quality teams, you're going to still find yourself in that 12-game playoff.
And then you see, going back to some of the things that they wanted to have, making sure the competitive balance was there, using historical data to formulate some of these games scheduling-wise. You're a good program. You're going to be playing good games. That's just what it is.
I wonder how that affects and we'll see the philosophy of the 12-team playoff, because if you only have 2 or 3 ranked games or even 1 or 2 ranked games, your margin for error is decreased. But if you're playing 6 teams that are ranked, and you win 4 and lose 2 or win 3 and 3 and sweep the table, it could change the way we look at, losses against good on good.
Let's get to a couple of the other new teams, the other two. UCLA, they get 5 home games next year, including current Pac-12 foes Oregon and USC. Iowa, Indiana, Minnesota, all making the magical trip to Pasadena. They'll be on the road for 4 games. That includes visits to Nebraska and Penn State. Last time the Bruins visited State College was 1967, the year Gary Beeben won the school's lone Heisman Trophy. The 2025 season has the Bruins on the road for 5 conference games, meaning that is the year they go to SC. They'll also visit Ohio State and Michigan State, among others. The home slate in 25 features Nebraska, Penn State, and Washington. 2026 will feature their first conference games against Illinois, Michigan, Purdue, and Wisconsin. USC has 4 home games next year. Nebraska, Penn State, Wisconsin, and Rutgers all going to the Coliseum. Will mark the first ever meeting between the Trojans and the Scarlet Knights. The Trojans' 5 road games include 2 on the West Coast, that crosstown battle with UCLA and a trip to Washington. The Trojans will also venture to the Big House, first time they played there since 1958. 2025 sees the Trojans at home for 5 games. They welcome Michigan, Iowa, Michigan State, and Northwestern. First meeting with the Cats since the memorable Rose Bowl, New Year's Day in '96. Road trips include their first visit to Illinois in nearly 3 decades, as well as journeys to Lincoln, Eugene, and West Lafayette. And then 26, first conference home games with Indiana and Ohio State. So, thoughts on seeing the Bruins and Trojans and some of those matchups?
Yeah, just another thought to build off what you said. You can see how the planning's being played, because there's 4 away, then 5 away. Well, the 5th away is USC, UCLA. The 5th away is Oregon, Washington. So just building that in to limit some of the travel was great. I just think for these programs that we're adding, all with new coaches, all on an upward trend. Now, some of them, USC's losing Caleb Williams most likely, whereas UCLA, they got that young freshman, Dante Moore. So it'll be interesting to see, and they've all recruited well, where they're at year 1 and then how they develop as they get comfortable with the league.
I think the other side of that, too, is how do they recruit? Is another interesting thing. We talk about scheduling, but it's also going to have a big part of where you're going to recruit. Will you open up new home bases or add to your home base where you want to recruit? So, listen, I think these games are going to be amazing, but I'm also interested in seeing just some of the mechanics behind it. Do you travel on a Thursday night?
Right.
Or Thursday afternoon as opposed to Friday.
One other detail I do want to add about the scheduling for the West Coast teams. We mentioned, obviously, USC and UCLA play each other every year, same with Oregon and Washington. They also play the other West Coast teams 3 times in 5 years. So, in other words, UCLA and USC play each other every year. They play Oregon and Washington 3 times in that 5-year cycle. Again, minimizes the travel somewhat for those schools. Taking a look at the next 3 years for Michigan. Mentioned they host both Oregon and USC next year. Trojans and Wolverines have played 8 Rose Bowls, just 2 regular season games. Those were in the late 50s. The Maize and Blue head to the Coliseum in 2025. Good home schedule: Ohio State, Purdue, Washington, Wisconsin. You got Penn State and UCLA visiting the Big House in 2026. For Ohio State, next year's schedule includes only one of the 4 new members. That is the game at Oregon. They will play 2 of those schools in 2025, traveling to Washington and welcoming UCLA. And then, as we mentioned, their first conference game against USC comes at the Coliseum in 2026. Will be the 25th all-time meeting, first since the 2017 Cotton Bowl, a series that dates all the way back to the 1930s. So what stands out there, fellas?
Well, I think you think about Michigan, you think about where they are right now as a program. They're flying high, and these are the type of games they need to be involved in each and every year. I think they will have to start to also look at non-con conference schedule, because they're going to have a great schedule to play against each and every year, looking at our new format. But I really like what Michigan is doing, and I think it's so much about where the program is headed and can continue to head when you look at their schedule.
They play Texas out of conference next year, too. So that schedule is a gauntlet. Now, again, we said there's no easy schedules, but that is a challenging schedule. So it adds to the context to me, the urgency this year, the way the stars have aligned, the way your veterans are on the field. This is your shot. This is a really good shot. It's going to get more difficult going forward.
It is going to be really interesting, and this is something not necessarily to dwell on today because we have so much information to get through, but how does this impact non-conference scheduling going through when you have a gauntlet like we're going to have in the Big Ten? It'll be fascinating to see the different philosophies and what schools adapt. We do want to turn to another set of rivals, and this is Wisconsin and Minnesota. And again, they're going to play every year, same way that Michigan and Ohio State will play every year. Here's the next 3 years for the Badgers. They get 4 at home next year, including that Axe game. Head to USC for the first time since the mid-1960s. They'll be at Oregon the following year, plus they welcome Iowa, Ohio State, and Washington to Camp Randall. 2026 includes their first visit to Pasadena as a conference game. Those two last played there in the Rose Bowl in January of 1999. Rival Minnesota makes the trip to Pasadena next year. They have not played UCLA there since the 1970s. Did square off in a Rose Bowl as well in the early 60s. Penn State, USC, Iowa, all in Minneapolis next year. They travel to Ohio State and Oregon in 2025. They'll square off with Washington in a conference game for the first time in 2026. So, Jake, what stands out about those two?
Well, I think I'll start with Wisconsin and just say that's going to be year 2 of the Fickle era, right? So it adds again to the importance of this year to lay a foundation, because once again, the West, it's not to say the West is easy right now, but it's certainly going to get more challenging. So for Coach Fickle and his staff, understanding that you want to lay a strong foundation because you're going to need it as you try to build success in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. You talk about building for the future. This is a part of it, because as we mentioned, these games aren't getting any easier. And we've also, when we look at their program, at least right now, we know that they still want to make adjustments to the roster to get their philosophy, offense and defensively, into a faster pace and be able to get to a point where they now are recruiting to the system that they want. Right now, it's not that way, but they're managing.
And that's what's so interesting, right, is we have seen this huge difference between the East and the West programs historically. Now the divisions are getting dissolved, right? It's just one big Big Ten. And so it's not being, are you built to beat the teams in your division? It's, are you built to beat everyone? 2 top teams at the end of the year. Those 2 teams end up in the Big Ten championship game. And there is some thought that that's part of the reason behind philosophical change at Wisconsin. Philosophical change, although, Purdue was chucking it around to begin with. But the notion of, hey, we're going air raid because that's what you're going to need to be the high-scoring team and the kinds of teams that are going to advance to the championship game. Maryland is fixated on a big game on its schedule Saturday. We're going to get into that in mere moments. But how about next year? Challenging road trips to Oregon and Penn State. They get USC in College Park. Those two have never played. 5 road games the next year, including a trip to UCLA, first meeting since the 1950s. The Bruins, in fact, are the only team of the new group of 4 that the Terps have ever played. The 2026 season has Maryland hosting Penn State, UCLA, and Wisconsin, among others. More schedule talk in a bit, but for now, pleased to be joined by Joel Klatt, the lead game analyst for Fox Sports and host, of course, of the Joel Klatt Show podcast as well. Joins us every week. Joel, I couldn't help but to note in your rankings this week that you have moved Michigan up to number 1. I'm interested what influenced your thinking. Was it more about what you've seen from Michigan or what you haven't seen from Georgia?
Oh, good question. I wasn't actually expecting you to go that direction. It's a combination of both. Let me start with that. Let's talk about Michigan first. Okay, so Rev, they are, I've compared them to a boa constrictor. There's an air of inevitability to their outcomes because of what they do. I also did a whole long segment this week on odds. Every set of downs, there's going to be odds in your favor or against you when it comes to third down, your ability to convert. And your job as an offense or a defense or a play caller on either side is to try to get the odds, turn the odds into your favor. And if you were watching the game against Nebraska, you would have seen that there was a dominant front seven from Michigan that Nebraska could not run the ball against, in particular on first down. So it was constantly 1st and 10 and then 2nd and 8, 2nd and 9, with the odds leaning towards the defense. What does that present? An air of inevitability. It's the reason those big buildings in Vegas are so beautiful. The same thing happens on the offensive side, where Rev, they can run the football, sustain blocks, get movement, and they turn 1st and 10 into 2nd and 4, 2nd and 3, 2nd and 1. Odds drastically in their favor. So what ends up happening is that they can throw the football when they want to, not when they have to, and then you die a slow death as an opponent. And they are like a boa constrictor in that regard. Now, Georgia moved down because that was the MO for Georgia in previous seasons. In fact, in the 4 previous seasons to this one, Georgia was a top 3 defense in the country when it came to yards per carry against. So their ability to stop the run, yards per carry defense. This year, they're 67th. It's just not the same. There's still a G on that helmet, but they're not playing like the Bulldogs of the last couple of years. And on the offensive side, they're actually down a full yard when it comes to just yards per carry offense. Because of that, Georgia is not the same. They will be in close games now with more opponents this year than they were in years previous, while Michigan has an inevitability of winning based on the odds that they present in their favor on first down.
It is really weird to see Georgia struggle to stop the run in the way that they have. There is an inevitability about Brock Bowers, though, but a one-player inevitability isn't as good as a whole team inevitability. But that should be an interesting game for them against Kentucky. Battle of the Unbeatens there. I'm really interested in your Battle of the Unbeatens that you guys have on Big Noon for obvious reasons. It's a Big Ten game, but also because I'm fascinated to see how Maryland stacks up against Ohio State. I'm interested, based on your film study, based on what you've watched this year to this point, how do you think Maryland stacks up with the Buckeyes?
I think Maryland is one of the most underrated offenses, quarterbacks, passing games in college football. No one wants to pay attention to what they've been doing, and yet Taulia has been doing this for a few years. Rev, I'm sure you guys have been watching this and covering this. He's a really good quarterback. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the entire conference, if not in the entire country. He makes good decisions. They're quick decisions. He's accurate with the football. They've got talented players to throw to. Now, are they great on the offensive line? No, and they've had to rebuild that through the transfer portal and development through players that have been in the program for 4 and 5 years. But they can threaten you on the offensive side. And the reason why that's so interesting this week is because of the questions surrounding Ohio State's defense coming into the year. Mainly, could they prevent the big play? Could they prevent the explosive play? Last year, against Michigan and Georgia, just those 2 games, Ohio State gave up 8 plays of over 40 yards just in those 2 games. It was a big reason why they lost both of those games, in particular against Georgia in a game that they probably should have won in the semifinal. This year, they have yet to give up a 40-yard play. That explosive defense, or the prevention of explosives by their defense, will be tested this week. And we're going to find out exactly what Ohio State is about defensively in the secondary, their ability to rush the passer when Maryland comes to Columbus on Saturday.
Right, because to your point, Maryland tied for the Big Ten lead in plays of 40 yards or longer this year. So this is a team that can absolutely stress a defense. Should be a very interesting game. Again, noon Eastern time on Fox. I'm interested, too, in kind of the schedule for Ohio State here over the next 2 weeks, right? You've got Maryland, and then you've got Purdue. And then you look at Penn State. Penn State has a bye and UMass. Which schedule would you rather have going into Penn State, Ohio State?
That's obvious. I'd rather have a bye in UMass.
Well, would you? Or I guess.
Yes. Yeah, no, I would. And okay. I know I'm acting like this is obvious.
Yeah.
But to me, this is obvious because that game is about, 1, knowing what you have, and then 2, being fresh and totally 100% to go in that game.
Yeah.
I believe Penn State knows what they have. Okay. They have been dominant already this year. Now, if they had been struggling up to this point, maybe my answer would be different. But they know what they have. they've corrected some issues that we even saw against Illinois, let's be frank, right? In that game, they couldn't block Jerzon Newton up front. But Drew Aller has gotten his feet wet. That defense is very good. In fact, by the way, 3 of the top 10 scoring defenses in America, all in the Big Ten East, with Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan. They know what they have. So at this point, it is about being ready for that moment, like a golfer being ready for a major championship. Their calendar now for the next 2 weeks can be all about execution and freshness. Meanwhile, Ohio State's different because their focus is going to have to be on Maryland, in particular that passing game. It's going to have to be on holding your own standard when you go to Purdue, a place that they've lost in the past, and that's going to be an emotional day there in Purdue as well. So for me, I would rather have the Penn State schedule, knowing what I know about Penn State to this point. Again, if they had been struggling up to this point, if Aller had thrown 6 interceptions to this point, maybe my answer would be different. But the fact that they've looked the way that they have, I would rather have Penn State's schedule.
Fair enough. Interested just in your take, big picture, and I'll let you go on the parity in college football this year. I mean, we were talking about Georgia earlier. We're talking about you changing your number 1 without a team losing, right? So it's just this is what I thought a week ago, and now I got some new data and watched these games, and now I think something different. This is unusual in college football. I mean, I feel like we usually get to this point, and we kind of know a couple teams that are definitely going to be there in the 14 playoff. I don't think we can say that this year. Do you like that? Are you enjoying the parity this year?
I love it. I love it. And in fact, the only bad part of this season, with the number of quality teams that we have, is that we're going to have the most controversy that we've ever had when it comes down to trying to select 4 of them to go and take part in the playoff. If there was ever a year where we need, not just want, but need a 12-team playoff, it's this season. Because you're exactly right. There isn't a great team or a dominant team that we just know they're absolutely going to be there. There's also a lot more really good teams that can play at the top end. I think like teams like Oregon. We'll see about Oklahoma and Red River this week. Texas is much better. Teams like Washington and USC. You've got all 3 teams in the Big Ten East that are elite level teams. Penn State has gotten themselves much better every single year. I love the parity in college football, but I am just looking down the line and I'm seeing the controversy that's going to pop up. Let me just paint a scenario for you. Can you imagine a scenario where, like, the Big 12 has an undefeated champion, let's say it's Texas, FSU remains undefeated, those 2 would be in, and then all of a sudden you've got to choose 2 of the following 3 teams: a 1-loss Georgia, a 1-loss Big Ten champ, and a 1-loss Pac-12 champ.
Yeah, but this is what the sport has been for years, right? So on this last year of the 4-team playoff, maybe it would be fitting that we go and we choose 2 of those 3, and people are screaming and yelling, and you have controversy, because then, to your point, it won't be that way going forward.
Yeah.
You're going to have the 12-team playoff, and pretty much if you're the 13th team, you're not going to have anything to scream and yell about.
That's right.
Because you should have finished in the top 12. It is shaping up to be an incredible year. Really fun to visit with you about it each and every week, and look forward to the game on Saturday.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, bud. Have a good one.
We continue to unveil the conference matchups going forward in the Big Ten. Again, the full list is available on big10.org. Rutgers gets 3 of the 4 new Big Ten teams next season. They're at USC, home against Washington and UCLA. Really appealing home schedule. Wisconsin coming to town, as well as Minnesota and Illinois. They welcome Oregon and Penn State the next year. A reminder that Maryland is their rivalry game. They'll be in College Park 2 of the next 3 years. How about Penn State? They also get 3 of the 4 new teams next season. As was mentioned earlier, they go to USC. They host UCLA and Washington. Home schedule in 25 includes Oregon and Nebraska. Remember, no protected rivals for the Nittany Lions. The 26 season sees them at Michigan and Washington. By the way, their first game in Seattle since 1921. I'm sure that was an easy road trip. And then home against USC. There might have been some missed class time there. Michigan State's next 3 years. They play Michigan every year. Home this season, so it's in Ann Arbor next year. All 5 of their home games in 24 are against teams that are currently in the Big Ten. Not the case in 25 when they host UCLA as well as Penn State and Michigan. The Spartans' first conference meeting with Washington doesn't come until 2026, and they will be happy to know then Michael Penix will be gone at that point because he has been a problem for them, frankly. What stands out here?
I mean, you look at the Penn State, right? You talk about the whiteouts that they have, that type of environment. They got a lot of games to choose from, right? That they want to have whiteouts. So, I mean, that jumps out. Again, I think the quality of opponents of our teams that are playing at a high level right now, there's some great matchups there.
I think for Penn State, you think about the state of the program. You have a young quarterback, a young backfield. You've recruited really well. So you're saying on the up and up, and then we do away with divisions. They have no protected rivalries. It's like, wow, nice Penn State. Oh, wait a second. No, actually, so you're not playing Michigan, but you're playing UCLA, Washington, and USC. That's a gauntlet.
Again, their choice not to have protected rivalries.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah. That's a gauntlet. That's a gauntlet.
And it's interesting because we do think, Michigan State and Penn State play for a trophy. They play for the land grant trophy. And I think there had been some speculation that maybe that would be a rivalry. But one thing that I think is really cool, and again, stuff that's just kind of baked into this when you really start the deep dive, they're going to play 3 times in 5 years.
Right.
So it's not a protected rivalry, but we're going to see them one more time than the minimum. We're going to see them the most times you can play without it being protected.
I think the other interesting thing, you look at Rutgers' schedule, right? And they had to draw Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan every year. It looks a little easier, but they still got
you don't think people are deliriously happy?
And think about the home schedule that they have. I mean, they're going to get some great games there, too.
Yeah, no doubt. But if you're Rutgers, if you're Maryland, you're Indiana, you'll take your chances with the new teams, but you don't want to have to deal with those teams in the East every single year. So it works out for them. Iowa, the only school in the conference with 3 protected rivals, Minnesota, Nebraska, and Wisconsin, will appear on their schedule every year. Challenging road slate next year at Maryland, Ohio State, UCLA, among others. The home slate includes 2 of those rivalry games, plus Northwestern and Washington. Oregon and USC appear on the conference slate for the first time in 2025, and then 2026 includes a home date with Ohio State. As for the Huskers, the Hawkeyes are their only rivalry game. Nebraska goes to USC next season. Amazingly, just the 6th ever meeting between those 2 historic powers. The Huskers are at Penn State and UCLA in 2025. They welcome USC and Michigan. And then 2026 has Ohio State and Washington coming to Memorial Stadium. I love that Iowa still gets to protect all of its rivals. I think any of us who have been around the league, we know how important those are to Hawkeye fans and Hawkeye players. But what else?
I think the fact that, when you look at it, particularly that first year, having to go to USC, UCLA, I think that ends up being a great matchup for them. They still have to build. You talk about this Illinois team, Iowa team. They still have to continue to build what they're going to be offensively. But to have UCLA early, I think is a great matchup for them.
I think just from a general theme, really, what this does, this change, it forces you to ask the question, is what we've done going to be good enough in the new landscape? And you think about the type of teams that are coming to the Big Ten, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, those are teams with explosive offenses. So it asks Iowa the question, which then forces a response to say, how can we elevate? And this is a question they've been asking for a while now, but it just increases the urgency to elevate the offense to compete with the high-flying offenses that are being added.
Right. I think that's fascinating. Kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier, which is, and it makes sense, you were built to win a certain way.
Yes.
Will you still be able to win that way? I mean, defense and special teams are still going to matter.
Absolutely.
Right? Those are huge parts of the game, but can you figure something out a little bit offensively? Also, interesting to see that Nebraska has played every one of the new members of the conference at least twice since 2006. So, where we're talking about a lot of these being new games, not that new for Nebraska. Again, part of this is they spent some of that time not in the Big Ten, but also just kind of the philosophy and the way that they have scheduled in the non-conference. So really interesting there. Let's dive into another set of rivals, and that is Purdue and Indiana. Here's what it looks like for the Boilers. Remember, they play both the Hoosiers and Illinois every year. Nebraska, Oregon, Penn State all come to Ross-Ade next season. The road schedule in 25 includes trips to Michigan and Washington. They welcome Ohio State and USC that year, and then the 26 season has them at Iowa, Penn State, and UCLA. What about the Hoosiers, you ask? Well, they, of course, have that protected rivalry with Purdue every season. They get 5 home games next year with Michigan and Washington, both visiting Bloomington. They'll be at Ohio State and UCLA. It'll mark the first time they have ever played the Bruins. 2025 will have the Hoosiers hosting UCLA, a home slate that also includes Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan State. They'll be on the road for 5 games that year. That will include a trip to Oregon. It is the first visit to Eugene since the Jerry DiNardo-led Hoosiers knocked off the Ducks in 2004. And no, he did not pay me to say that. I just felt compelled to talk about it.
You know, it's interesting. Talk about Purdue, right? And you talk about where they are and how they're positioned, and you keep bringing up just the style of play. Right, on the defensive side, this is a team you know is built the way they want to call the game. You want to slow teams down, but this is a team offensively that throws it around, scoring points. And when you look at Indiana, that's a team that's trying to figure out who they are as they go through this process, because there are going to be games, as we've talked about some other programs like Iowa, you're going to need to find a way to score points and maybe change the philosophy of the way you're approaching offense.
You brought something up earlier. Is how does this change recruiting, just from an exposure standpoint? And I think about Purdue. I go back to when I was a recruit. In terms of an exciting offense, they're a good product on TV historically. I mean, they're putting up big-time points. Yeah. They are attacking you downhill, but the exposure will improve being able to play some of these opponents. How does that affect recruiting to say, wow, you know what, that's a fun offense. I'd like to be involved with that. So it'll be interesting to me to see how they take advantage of those opportunities as Ryan Walters gets his head coaching career going, and then what does that do for them from a recruiting standpoint?
I think Purdue's a real wild card in a lot of this. I mean, I think the reality is that fans are going to sit and look at the schedule and try to figure out, okay, who are the teams that we match up well against? Mm-hmm. I don't have a great sense of where Purdue's going to be, right? 3 or 5 years from now. I think it's really trending up. They obviously made the Big Ten championship game last year. Ryan Walters seems like a really good hire. You know they're going to play good defense. And then as you talk about this explosive offense, like, who is it? Maybe it's Purdue. Maybe it's someone else who takes a really significant jump that's a different program 3 or 4 years from now than they are right now. And that is, again, that's the thing you can't control for.
Right.
Obviously, you try to make it as equitable as you can. I bring them up, but it could be anyone. Yeah, I mean, and that's what's so interesting.
When you talk about Wisconsin, the same thing, right? Yeah. They're laying the groundwork to who they want to be in the coming years.
But I would say you would look at Wisconsin on your schedule 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and you would have always said, well, it's going to be a challenging game.
Yes.
Right. So who is the team that you may not have said that about?
That's fair.
Who will? Maybe it's Maryland, right? Maybe Maryland turns into a powerhouse. I mean, that's to me where it gets.
Well,
really
we kind of watched Washington do this, where they've been able to have some spikes at times during over the last 20 years or so, but then they go down. But now they're rising again.
And let's be honest, I mean, it to your point, it applies to the West Coast teams as well.
Yeah.
Like USC didn't necessarily have it rocking and rolling for a while here, but it looks like they're fixing to come back with Lincoln Riley. Same thing with UCLA. Yeah. Now all of a sudden, it feels like the tide has turned a little bit for them. So that's the unpredictability of it, and that's what makes it fun.
Well, Purdue really, I mean, they're the spoiler makers, right? Like if you're a ranked team and you're playing Purdue, you're sweating throughout the week because they've been able to make some splashes. So you've shown the potential to do that.
Yes.
The question is how do you do that on a consistent basis?
And again, I mentioned that Illinois is a rivalry game for Purdue. So let's get into the Illinois schedule as well. Again, Purdue with 2 rivals, not just Indiana, but also the Illini. So you'll see Purdue on their schedule every year. They get 5 road games next year, including their first trip to Eugene since 1995. 4 home games with both Michigan and Michigan State visiting Champaign. The 25 season, we'll see the Illini visit Washington. They have a really appealing home schedule that includes visits by USC and Ohio State, as well as their rivalry game with the Wildcats. The next year will feature their first meeting with UCLA since the Fight Hunger Bowl in 2011. That was Illinois' last bowl win. And how about Northwestern? Washington is the only new Big Ten team on their schedule next year. They're going to head to Seattle. They get the Illini and Ohio State among their 4 home games. They're at USC in 25, home against the Ducks and Bruins, along with Michigan. And then their first ever trip to Eugene comes in 2026. So, kind of a catch-all question here at the end, schedule related. Is there anything you haven't been able to talk about? Maybe some of those teams we just mentioned, including Maryland, which we got to just before we went to Joel. We haven't really talked about them, but it could be Illinois or Northwestern.
It could be
Anything
them,
else
but you look at Northwestern, right? I mean, take away what's happened off the field, right? But this team is playing really hard right now. So they can make the adjustments they need to. I mean, it looks like a very favorable schedule for them.
I go back to Maryland, a schedule we didn't just see right there. They're playing in the East, and one of those teams that we thought maybe benefits from doing away with division. So now you don't have to play on the next year's schedule. You're not playing Ohio State or Michigan, but you're playing Oregon and USC. It just, again, it's a theme I keep coming back to. It's like, my good, right?
Yeah. Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
And what I'm excited to see is a challenge creates a response, right? So this is going to be fun for us to watch as a product, but it's also a challenge for these programs. How do you respond? How do you elevate? Because you have to continue to improve.
You've watched the quarterbacks of these teams in the Pac-12 right now. These quarterbacks are difference makers. You can make
pretty good.
You can make an argument that that conference has the best quarterbacks, and they're playing as well as any quarterbacks or conferences played over the last few years. I think this is going to be a huge push. There always is a push for quarterbacks when you talk about the portal. There's going to be a huge push now because you need to have that person under center.
So fascinated to see how all of this plays out. I said this earlier, I'll say it again. It's a great league right now. It is just going to be incredible with these games, these matchups. Can't wait to break them down with you guys. Wrapping things up on what has been an action-packed Big Ten today. There's been a lot going on today. We expanded the show just to fit it all in, but we still have a few games that we want to discuss. Let's start with tomorrow night. This has not been the start that either Illinois or Nebraska wanted to their season. They're both winless in conference play. What's going to sway the balance in terms of who gets a win they really need tomorrow?
You know, I think one of the things that happens for Nebraska on their side, they've really done a good job of finding out who they are right now, running the football and staying consistent. I think getting to a third and manageable situation is going to be important. You flip to the other side, you think about this Illinois defense, particularly that front seven. They've been very aggressive getting after quarterback, having some success, but they keep turning the ball over and they keep having penalties. There's a lot of self-inflicted situations there. You go back, I think last week, they might have had 13, 14 missed tackles, they extended drives. Nebraska wants to run the football, right, and be in third and short situations. So there are a couple things to keep a look at, but both teams really have to take care of the football to give themselves an opportunity to win.
To your point, these are two of the 5 power conference teams with double-digit turnovers this year. And I think we looked at the Illinois-Purdue game last week kind of the same way because they both had lots of turnover issues. It turned out Illinois only turned over once. It was costly, right? But you know, maybe they've started to minimize that just a little bit. And you also wonder, again, Nebraska's run game was slowed down last week. Michigan is phenomenal. As we know, defensively, Illinois has really struggled against the run. Can the Huskers, they lead the Big Ten in rushing, can they crank it up again? And
you know they're going to want to do it.
They're going to try to. Rutgers and Wisconsin, I see this as a really good gauge of how improved Rutgers is.
Yeah, it is. And I really like the way Rutgers' philosophy around what they're doing offensively, right? They know who they are. They'll go for it. If they're in a third and short, fourth and short situation, they are not afraid to go for it because they want to control. Time of possession has become really important to them, and they're playing really solid defense, and I think that's what's impressive. You think about Wisconsin, they want to run it, right? They need to run. This could be a really fast game. Right? This could be a fast game. But I think it also
want to keep it on the ground.
I think it also comes down to quarterbacks are going to have to make some plays in this game. Which one can really have positive effects on their team in the passing game? That's going to be a big part.
And cut down on mistakes. And Gavin Wimsatt has really done that.
And they've done a great job
this year, to his credit.
Building his confidence over time.
Okay, so finally, Jake left you to handle this final block all by yourself. And that's formidable, but it's nowhere near as formidable as what you have to do on Saturday because Howard is playing Northwestern.
Yes, we are.
No, you are. Oh, it's more than just you.
It's more than me. I'm bringing a team with me.
A whole team of Howards.
A whole team.
Well, it limits you in recruiting.
Well, you know, it's what we have to do.
Everyone's got to be named Howard. Seriously, it's a big game for Northwestern. They can get to 3-3. I don't think anyone would have anticipated that at the beginning of the year. What are you watching here from the Wildcats?
When you start to think about where they are right now, and what I really like, they are continuing to play hard. This is a team that has not tried to lay down and not do it. They have responded really well to this coaching staff in really tough situations, which I think really speaks volumes to the people in that building and on that practice field when they get after it. This is a game, though, right? They need to win and need to control, because now all of a sudden you start to look at look down at the schedule. Can they get 6 wins? There's no way at all I would have talked about them getting to a bowl and being in a bowl situation after going through what they've gone through.
But these are the games you have to take care of, and we have seen them lose.
Can't do
FCS games, including last year. See whether or not they can get the win in this one.
I'm not pulling for Howard, by the way.